Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome back, Law and Legitimacy. It's Wednesday, smack dab in the middle of the week. I'm hopping on a jet plane in a couple hours, heading out to LA, where I'll attend comedy workshops for a long weekend and get on my feet as much as I can to try to improve my ability to communicate.
So
God
just
knows
so
I
I,
need help.
so I'm clear on that, Norm. Are you doing the second boot camp, the
Yeah,
same? So
yeah.
Adam Carolla, Jay Leno boot camp. I heard them
That whole crowd.
advertising it. So
Yep.
you're going back through. That's brilliant.
Well, I mean, your first time I went, I learned a lot. This time I'll learn more because I know what I didn't know, and I'm really looking forward to it. So I want to give a shout out to
You are
Maury.
such an amazing student, by the way. I just have to say that. I think that I'm learning more about. I'm understanding more about your success in an organic way from just observing you as a forever student. You're an amazing example, Norm. I think that it
Amazing,
I
amazing.
mean, the humility that it takes for you to go out there for a week prior, do the camp, get the exposure. You had some positive experiences, but didn't have the humility to do it again with full knowledge that there's nothing guaranteed and just with this resolute desire to be better. I just
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that
I mean,
we can all learn from that.
that's a trial lawyer's life. I mean, that as I joke around with the lawyers in my office, it's called a practice for a reason. You never get it perfect. And if you're going to try cases for a living, I always tell people, you got to try 20 or 25 cases before you really know what you're doing. And they panic. Like, what about those 20 or 25 clients that I'm learning on? Well, it's kind of the way it is. And so I always tell folks, when you go into court, especially baby lawyers, don't try to do everything all at once. Learn one new skill at a time. Learn how to lay a foundation for past recollection recorded. We'll talk more about this in a minute. And then once you've got that, you've got an arrow in your quiver. And if you spend 25 trials learning one discrete skill in each trial, at the end of 25 trials, you've got 25 arrows in your quiver. And that's a pretty good place to be if you're Odysseus and then you're in the hall of the shooters, standing at the doorway, slinging death dealing arrows at them. I say that only because, on the topic of studentship, I just listened to Robert Fitzgerald's translation of the Odyssey last weekend. It's the umpteenth time I've gone through the book, and every time I go through it, I learn something new. And so, and it's fun to reread classic literature throughout a lifetime because you see different things each time. A young man's Odyssey is the tale of Homer, or the tale of Odysseus on his way home from the Trojan Wars, overcoming every obstacle and being resolute. An old man's Odyssey is he's finally made it back to Penelope, and now they're going to come to terms, and he's getting prepared. He's dealing with his father and his father's dotage and looking at the possibility of sweet death. Your perspective changes over time. But hey, thank you for the compliment, Mike. I'll take it.
It's super sincere, right? I mean, and I hate using the word super. I sounded very Gen Z there, but it is sincere. And I think that what I recall, because I've played sports. I've said this before, very competitively for much of my young life, and I had a football coach in high school, and he had a lisp, and he was the offensive line coach. And but he administered the practices. He was all about the cadence and the rhythm, and he kept us on schedule. And I will never forget his just commanding, "We need reps, gentlemen. We need reps." And that was all about getting more and more exposure, economizing time, being efficient, and also exposing yourself to as many occasions to learn and be better and be better and be better in a finite amount of time in a season, right?
Yeah,
In
that's
one,
right.
it's stuck with me forever.
And
Shout
not
out.
being afraid to fail, realizing that there's always room for improvement. You may have a peak moment where you think you really nailed it, but that you can always do better. I mean, one of the great things about being a trial lawyer is, reading transcripts of your performance. You always think, man, I nailed it. And you read the transcript and you think, do I know that asshole? Oh, can they change the name? How much of a klutz can you be? But you got to do it. But hey, let's turn to Fanigate. Mike, I have a question for you. What's your birth date?
I don't remember what.
Yeah,
What?
this we're gonna play. Let's play Terrence Bradley on the witness stand, Mr. Bradley. I have a question for you, sir. Yes, yes. What's your birth date? Well, I don't really know. I beg your pardon, sir. You don't know the date of your birth? Well, I'd be speculating. When I tumbled from the womb, I didn't have a notepad with me nor the capacity to understand a calendar. I had no language but my native language, which was whining, screaming, and carrying on. It took me years to learn to read, and it took me years to learn to use speech and to understand such things as the movement of time and my place in a universe bounded by space and time. Mr. Bradley, shut up. What's your birthday? Well, I'd be speculating. Well, haven't you told people in the past that you had a discrete birth date, month, and year? Well, yes, but why would you do that? Well, I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. That was effectively Terrence Bradley on the stand yesterday. I'm being a little unfair, but not much. Bradley had previously sent text messages and electronic communications to lawyers for one of the defendants, to Ashley Merchant, in particular. I don't recall who she's representing off the top of my head, in which he said, in response to questions about when Fawny and Nathan began to heat the sheets, was it before he was appointed as special prosecutor? And what was one of Bradley's answers? Yes, absolutely. What was his answer on the stand yesterday? I have no specific knowledge. It was the spirit of Bill Clinton asking what is. It raises an interesting question for me as a practitioner, and that is, at what point does a witness saying they can't recall perjurious? In other words, what did you have for breakfast this morning? I can't recall. What did you do moments before you walked into the room? I can't recall. What color is your car? I can't recall. Are you married? I can't recall. Didn't you tell me 2 days ago that X was the case? I don't recall. Maybe you really are a person who suffers early onset geriatric aphasia. Maybe somebody hit you in the head with a baseball bat, or maybe, just maybe, Fanny and Nate worked you over and you're trying to pay debts to friends and not throw them under the bus. It was an unseemly display that gives the trial judge the ability now to do whatever he likes. I got to walk back a prediction I made earlier in the week. On Monday, when Bradley met with Judge McAfee, I think it's Scott McAfee, in McAfee's chambers for a 90-minute meeting, I thought that Bradley may have been inspired by some vision of integrity and brought to the court's attention that perhaps he was aware that Bradley or that Nate, yeah, I know, silly me, lawyers, integrity. Wait a minute. Isn't that an oxymoron? Who you calling an ox? No, who you calling a moron? Why would a moron be oxy? Why can't a moron just be foxy? In any case, I thought he might have been in there saying, hey, look, I don't know what to do about the attorney-client privilege, lie. Right now, I hope there's a transcript of what occurred in chambers, because what's reported is that McAfee and Bradley had a conversation, and it was concluded that some of the information that Bradley had to offer was not covered by the attorney-client privilege, but not all. And so how did that line get drawn? In the colloquy reported in the press from his Bradley's time on the stand yesterday, he was asked about when the relationship between Bradley and Wade began. He didn't know. Why? I don't have personal knowledge based on my observations. Were we expecting that Bradley would get invited to Fanny's apartment to watch the two go at it at hammer time? That's playing us for fools. And so then it appears, yeah, it appears that Bradley was able to parse what to say and when to say it by avoiding saying or Wade told me X. That would be the attorney-client privilege. So if he was not going to be permitted to say what Wade told him for privilege grounds, and then he was confined to his personal observations, of course he didn't see him heating the sheets. I mean, unless it was a threesome, in which case, yeah, and so it's just a mess. And I think McAfee now is going to be able to say, after hearing this testimony, that while the court has its suspicions and while there are good reasons to doubt what people have said, the court does not have information sufficient to conclude that these two actually were going at it beforehand. And that would be a real disappointment. I think that right now, the stink factor from Fulton County is overwhelming, and even in the absence of ironclad proof that Fani and Nathan lied, the appearance that they did is overwhelming, if for no other reason than the 2,000 telephone calls between Fani and Wade before he became appointed over an 11-month period. I mean, I love my wife, but I doubt I've called her 2,000 times in the last 5 years or 10 years. I mean, this is
How many letters have you written? I'm just kidding.
yeah, well, or text messages. So it's an unseemly mess. I don't know where it goes from here. I think McAfee will likely let Fani stay on the case, and that's just not going to promote respect for the justice system. In fact, Mike, you stumbled upon some interesting poll results that ask and reflect a partisan divide on folks' perception of whether the prosecutions of Trump and the litigation against him is brought in good faith, or whether it's a form of partisanship. Well, who did the poll, and what were the results?
Well, if we could hold that for just a moment, because I wanted
Yeah,
to do several comments here. Dawn says, how will the judge weasel out of this? I think he's a weak partisan. Angry Dog says, I agree with you, Dawn. Mark in Vermont says, she held that sex assault allegation over him, and follows that up by saying, for all the water Bradley carried for Wade and Willis, DA Willis will still file sexual assault charges against him for blabbing to Merchant about his knowledge of when they started their affair, which just is an interesting
how does
theory.
that? I'm not following the. I'm Mark. I'm kind of dense. Where are you in Vermont, by the way? But I'm kind of dense. What sexual assault charge? I've clearly not followed the story closely enough.
So again, remember when I told you that Attorney Cross for the state, when Bradley was on the stand, is the one that debuted the knowledge that Bradley departed the firm with Wade based on some sort of sexual
Oh yeah,
assault
yeah, yeah,
allegations in the
yeah,
office, right? And that was the revelation at the end of that second day of
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah, yeah.
hearings that brought this, that really compelled the in-camera review, even though they had talked about doing an in-camera conversation, McAfee with Bradley. That really put gas on that fire. And so I think that what Mark is saying here, and Mark, I'm not going to put words in your mouth. Mark says he's in Manchester. Um, is that for all the water that he had been carrying for Wade and Willis, and so again, asserting the attorney-client privilege, sort of not having direct knowledge, being very, very judicious with the way that he revealed any details, and then being sort of stabbed in the back. What would be the motivation for him to go into chambers and to not be as inspired as you thought that he might be by candor toward the tribunal and notions of equal justice, right? And that would be some sort of I guess corrupt feeling that he was going to be punished on the other side of this, maybe even irrespective of what he did uh, during the rest of these proceedings or these hearings. So I guess that's why I bring it up, is that, Don, to your credit, you've been very skeptical of Judge McAfee from the beginning, especially when it came to this evidentiary hearing. I'm starting to feel more and more like you, Norm, that perhaps this is going to result in a big nothing at the end of it. But I also
Yeah.
agree in what you said about the big stink, in that there is a macro version of this. There is the sort of branded version of this prosecution now that will not be able to extricate itself from the overwhelming perception that the prosecution is corrupt, right? That there are conflicts and ethical issues, and then there is a massive hiding behind technicalities, right? That the judge was unwilling to actually enforce, to actually play a role to see to it that truth is actually revealed in court.
Yeah, I think that's right. Don, your question, how will the judge weasel out of this? I think he's a weak partisan. Here's how he does it. He will highlight the standard, the legal standard, the what has to be proven by either it's a preponderance or clear and convincing evidence, and then he will give he'll blow a kiss to the defendant's lawyers and say, while the court understands the reasons for this hearing and commends counsel for their vigor in pursuing claims on respect to the client, the court reaches the conclusion that suspicion is not enough, and that based on the testimony of of Miss Willis, the testimony of Mr. Wade, and the testimony of Terrence Bradley, there is not sufficient proof for this court to conclude that Willis and Wade had a relationship prior to Wade's appointment, and B, that Willis enjoyed some financial benefit as a result of the prosecution. While there were weaknesses and certain credibility issues that arose with respect to Terrence Bradley's recollection and the cell data indicating communication and travels between by Wade and Willis suggest that something was going on, this court cannot tell what. And based on the record before it, the court declines to disqualify them. I think that's going to be that's how that will work, Dawn. And so when you're in court, how do you know you're losing an issue? Usually when the court comes out and praises your performance. I'd like to commend defense counsel for its brilliant defense of da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. However, and it's that however that's the turning point. And I think that it's likely to be the case that McAfee punts on this one.
Julian asks, "Is it really that easy to become a lawyer?" To which I responded, "That's a loaded question. We'll save that for later."
Well, I mean, there are all sorts of lawyers, Julian. You go in the United States, almost all lawyers go to law school for 3 years. There are a couple states that permit interns or for clerkships or apprenticeships. Thank you. Not many. And then you pass a bar exam. So it's a 3 or 4 year commitment to master the basics. And then you're on your own. And so, I'd like to say anyone can do it if they spend the time, but not everyone can. But it doesn't take much. I mean, I recall in one of my law school classes looking around thinking, there's 70 or 80 of us in here. There are only about 2 or 3 people in this class I'd trust to handle a parking ticket of mine. But almost everybody graduated and almost everybody's hanging a shingle right now. And the public at large learns at its peril who's worth going to and who isn't. So
I think the more interesting question is the psychological profile of those that are compelled into a role with the state, right? Especially in this day and age. And what we're seeing right now is sort of indicative of something in particular. It is a lust for small power wielded mightily, right?
I guess, but you've got the IVF story. Didn't you want to talk about those poll results first?
Well, I wanted to give us time to talk about all the Trump stuff in conjunction with that on the other end. So I figured we would race through this. Well, we don't have to race through it. I think this is fascinating, by the way.
Yeah, so we mentioned this briefly yesterday, the IVF, the in vitro fertilization ruling. The Alabama Supreme Court has held that at the moment of conception, there is life and there is a person. And it's hard to find fault with that conclusion as a matter of logic. It's going to be hard to live with that conclusion as a matter of experience. There's a great article. I think that the author's name is a fellow named Fletcher. I can't remember the first name. I read it in law school, Julian, forever ago. And that's when I went to law school. We used stylus and quills. And Cicero was still lecturing. And he talked about the attributes of personhood. And said, there are 19 or so things that make a person a person. One of them is the ability to conceptualize a sense of self over time and to maintain it, notwithstanding whatever changes. So there's a self-awareness, the ability to express oneself, a certain sense of autonomy, all higher level cognitive things that distinguish us from other life forms. And so so Fletcher's point was that while there may be life, the life may not be a person. And the essay raises a very interesting issue, and that is, where do you draw the line? Is a person who has 17 of the 19 attributes of personhood somewhat less of a person? And do we accord them less protection as a matter of law? Well, what about the disabled? And so that line drawing exercise troubles some, and so some want to say that life begins at the moment of conception, and if life begins at the moment of conception, and everything that is necessary to make a fully developed person over time is present in that initial genetic bang, then you got a person there. And, I think that's the safe course as a matter of logic, but as a matter of experience, it's problematic. Because now, you've got people who are engaged in attempting to become pregnant by means of fertilizing eggs outside the womb and then holding these embryos in a cryogenic or some sort of storage facility. So what you've got basically are frozen people that need to be implanted in a womb to become fully developed persons. If you destroy one of those frozen people, are you engaging in murder? Because you're taking the life of a person. As a matter of logic, the answer is yes. As a matter of experience, that's a troubling conclusion to reach. And Mike talked earlier about the small power, the petty, why people become prosecutors. It was a wonderful line, Mike. I don't recall it right
All
now.
power wielded mightily.
Yeah, small power wielded mightily. You're going to give prosecutors the ability to declare that a person who destroys an embryo is a murderer, and then you're going to have juries asked to render a decision on whether that is and whether that's appropriate. Troubling consequence. So, Julian, you asked what's the book called? I assume that's the Fletcher article. It was a law review article. If I can remember, I'll try to find it and post something earlier. I read it like 40 years ago. It's perhaps outdated now, but it certainly made a quite an impact on me. But the business about, so Alabama makes this decision, and one of the things we saw in
the decision, the Alabama Supreme Court ruled that frozen embryos pursuant to IVF are children.
Well,
as a bottom line.
Yeah, and that say what you will about that. That is you either love the decision, hate it, or perhaps like me, you're ambivalent, confused by it. That's the law in that state. What does that mean with respect to other states? And so this is sort of a federalism question, which we saw highlighted in the Dobbs versus Women Health decision last year, which said there is no federal right to abortion. That's a matter that's returned to the states. And now we see tremendous drama between the states. We've got some states, I think Vermont, Oregon, Massachusetts, and there's a fourth that have what are called pill mills that are sending on demand to people in states that prohibit abortion or create tremendous obstacles to abortion. They're sending aborticides through the mail to these people so that they can induce their own abortions. And officials in these states that prohibit or limit abortion are saying, wait a minute, our police power says you can't do that here. And so you're using interstate commerce to send material into our state that people are using now in Alabama, presumably, to kill children. And the result is tremendous tension between the states. Several states tried to interest the United States Supreme Court in hearing this issue this term. The court denied a petition for a writ of certiorari to hear this issue, but expect it to come up again because if the states have the power to protect the health, education, and welfare of their citizens, and they have the right to determine whether a citizen can abort or not, they have the right to determine when life begins or not. Reasonable minds can reach differing, in my opinion at least, can reach different conclusions on some of these fundamental issues, and you'll expect the states to reach different conclusions. And in the absence of some overarching federal right, it's going to strain relationships between the states in ways that are problematic and troublesome. So.
Well, and I believe there is a vote today on a new bill that would effectively, I guess, guard against the feared political fallout for the GOP in Alabama, and looking to guard IVF treatment. One of the consequences of the Supreme Court ruling that IVF it creates children is that now medical professionals are reluctant to indulge for fear of liability, right?
No,
For
that's right. And
and
as well they should.
and that is
That's well they should.
and that's a very direct market response, right? So if we want to, look at this in economic terms, I mean, the potential legal liability affecting medical services providers in the state, and I think that it's interesting because IVF is not exactly cost effective, right? And so the storage component of this is part and parcel to the technology itself, right? I have family members that were successful going through the IVF process, and but it took a lot from them personally, spiritually, but also financially, right? And so the ability for these medical service providers that are in this domain to store embryos in order to give clients, in this case, the ability to patiently and be able to go through the process, because oftentimes it takes more than once going through the process. This is just a natural, a natural corollary to and a natural consequence of the Alabama Supreme Court decision. So I expect that this bill, which I think has been pushed forward by Senator Duckworth in Alabama, to pass pretty quickly here. It looks like the GOP is circling the wagons around at least protecting the healthcare system and the service providers and again the political fallout that is a natural consequence of that, I guess, unexpected decision.
So Dawn raises an interesting question. Person is a concept with fuzzy edges. When will I stop being one as I age? Dawn, based on some of your recent comments, you've already reached that point. But we love you anyhow. But no, I mean it's a great point because on the at the beginning, when does life begin? When does life become a person? Requires certain value judgments about the attributes of personhood, and those fall off over time as we age. Those of us of a certain age don't have the memory we once had. I'm not as fleet of foot as I once was. And I think as the decades, if I have decades left, approach, I will lose the ability to do certain things that I took for granted. If society has the ability to declare what attributes of personhood, what the attributes of personhood are, then at the end of life, people will lose the ability to to be regarded as a person at some point, and they'll be as expendable as an embryo, and that's the euthanasia problem.
And that's
Um,
a great way to analyze, I guess, the concept of life as well, looking at it from the other end of that chronological spectrum. Jackson Barrett on over on Rumble is resolute in his position that frozen embryos have no soul and therefore no brain cells, and that the brain is, quote, the transceiver for the soul. Neural networks need to exist for the soul to reside there. Ultimately, I think what we're getting at is, this is the concept of there being a frozen embryo capable of being put into a womb and maturing into I guess a deliverable baby, right? Is there's something in between there, and I guess I'm a little exasperated because my entire life, there's been a debate over abortion and trying to pinpoint when life begins. Does life begin at conception? And then I guess the ultimate question here is: are we going to regard IVF and an embryo as conception within that more culturally specific meaning?
they're tough questions without easy answers. Um,
I
but I
want to
wanted to say something about Jackson. This concept of ensoulment is again a loaded question. Certain theologians talk about quickening, a point at which live tissue becomes human life, and the notion of ensoulment is that somehow there comes a moment where in the development of a thing that God places a soul within the person. As Jackson phrases the issue, a soul might just be the epiphenomena of electrical activity by an organism complex enough to generate a sense of self-consciousness. That's the gamble with artificial intelligence. If all we are a complex set of neurons and that can be replicated, then we can create another thing with a sense of self that's not a biological life but is nonetheless a person. Kaboom! Game out, lights out, Yankee Stadium, here we come. Tough issues. So, thanks for pushing us in that direction. Maury, I see you're active today. I got your email last night. Thank you very much. Maury has a name that I won't disclose here, but Maury is a stand-up comic of some renown, and has been giving me tips on how to get on my feet and survive. I'll keep you posted on what happens in LA this weekend. Oh,
I love
Dawn, you're hoping this podcast will keep your mind going. I wish we had the music for the Twilight Zone. Dawn, welcome to another universe, an alternative place in space and time. You aren't in control of yourself, but you're actually Mike Boyer's alter ego in the form of a pickleball playing woman of a certain age who lives out west and wonders, is it all slipping between my fingers? Can I live forever? Can I drink the adrenochrome of Mike's youth and rekindle the passions of my earlier years? And the answer is we have no fucking idea, but we appreciate your listening.
Well, and I'll also just, pretend here that the implication of this comment is not that I'm a dummy.
Oh, but no, but I mean, let's be real
I'm
with folks. I mean, folks, there really aren't two of us here. I am Mike's avatar. Okay, Mike does all of this, and I don't really exist. You've never. I mean, let's play the Terrence Bradley game. Does Norm Pattis exist? Well, I don't know. I never met him. Well, you've seen him on a podcast, haven't you? Well, I've seen I've seen an image of him, but I don't know that he's actually anything other than Mike's avatar. And neither at that level do you, Dawn, because once you take the Terrence Bradley pill and you fall down that rabbit hole, we don't know what is, said President Clinton.
Tech issues equal soul.
Who says that?
Me. I don't know.
All right. Hey, so I mean, we got some time.
Of our humanity is sort of the lack of total mastery of technology, right?
Let's talk about lawfare.
So tomorrow I will be recording with what's called the Shade Room. The Shade Room is a sort of pop culture and politics media behemoth. They boast 27 million followers on Instagram. My understanding is that the Shade Room is putting together a new show, and it's called Room for Debate. And there is a segment within that Room for Debate where the hosts and the show are trying to bring in views from across the political spectrum. And my role tomorrow will be to discuss what, if any, implications there are for Donald Trump's campaign against the backdrop of the considerable lawfare being launched against him. And I did happen across this Harvard Caps Harris poll, which is the top line poll published 2 days ago in February, and it's about 70 slides long. But what we'll do, Norm, we'll talk quickly about, I guess, I think there are 5 cases against Donald Trump, notable cases against Donald Trump that are in the public consciousness and being reported on by the media in various ways. But I wanted to start with this, which is there are a question asked in 2 different ways. That's the splits that you see on the screen there. And the conclusion here is that a majority of voters, as of February 26, 2024, a majority of voters say Democrats are using the legal system in a biased way to take out a political opponent. And that is by a pretty considerable margin, even when they control for the way the question is phrased and framed, right? In the more concise version of that question, 58% of respondents agreed with the proposition that lawfare is being used to take out a political opponent. And when it is a more verbose version of that, 3 percentage points less, but still 55 to 45% of respondents agree that they think the legal prosecutions of Donald Trump are, well, let's see. Let me rephrase that. Do you think the Democrats today are engaged in lawfare, a campaign using the government and the legal system in a biased way to take out political opponent? 58% said yes.
Well, I mean, I think I'm getting alerts on my watch. My flight is departing at 1:57, so I don't have to leave yet for a while. Lawfare, that's an interesting concept. It's a word that I've resisted using until the last couple of weeks, because I believe that what the law prohibits, we don't have common law crimes in the United States. All crimes are defined by statute. And so to be a crime, conduct has to fit or meet, or the proof has to meet the elements of the crime. There has to be a certain act, there has to be a certain mental state. And so those are neutral. It's not a crime to be a Democrat. It's not a crime to be a Republican, but it's a crime as a citizen to engage in certain conducts. Prosecutors have the ability to pick and choose who they prosecute under these very general terms. And I think that the lawfare concept is that prosecutors are guided or prompted in part by their political commitments to choose to criminalize some conduct and not others. And it's hard, and I believe that's the right of an administration to do that. And so I don't fault differing administrations for having different priorities in how they enforce the criminal law. And I reject the notion of lawfare being illegitimate per se. Do I think that things have reached an extreme in the United States? I do. I think that Donald Trump and the prosecution of the J6 group, the treatment of Trump and the prosecution of the J6 defendants is shameful. And I unfortunately think that these prosecutions are deepening the partisan divide, and that Letitia James in New York, Merrick Garland in D.C., Fannie Williams in Atlanta are basically political criminals, because what they've done is they've taken cases that they can that they can make and have decided to make them, even though in the Letitia James case in New York there was really no proof of any harm. In the J6 case, we've transformed a riot of a couple hours long into, some event that threatened democracy itself. In the prosecutions of Donald Trump, there's almost a desperate lust, a desperate desire to take him out before the 2024 election so that he's ineligible even to be voted on. I think it's creepy. Did you have to put jalapeno Jack up on the screen? Does he ever look like he hasn't spent? Does he ever look like he hasn't sat on his best friend's butt plug or swallowed a jalapeno? I mean, the poor guy. So I think that there is lawfare going on in the country. I mean, somebody asked me yesterday about how Alex Jones was doing, with his $1.5 billion verdict, an extraordinary verdict. It mirrors the verdict against Rudy Giuliani. It mirrors the Donald Trump verdict in New York. These fines, these compensatory damages claims for hundreds of millions of dollars are unheralded in American history, and we tolerate them as expressions of what I don't know. They're certainly not expressions of what's just, fair, and reasonable. It remains to see what the appellate courts will do with all this.
Well, you know, I know the question is narrow for me in terms of how I think my position on this stream has been for a while that the lawsuits against Donald Trump, the criminal prosecutions against Donald Trump, are a feature of his campaign for president in 2024. And I don't know that there's anybody who could carry that burden other than Donald Trump, right? He is having to campaign by and through the court system, and that is the landscape of this election. And I also believe that there's very little that can be done to deter Trump's base from voting from checking his name at the ballot box. What I do believe is that the very widespread and insidious nature and the fanfare generated by these cases has a negative consequence to the Democrat Party because many people who would otherwise be turned off to Trump are forced to ask themselves really, really fundamental questions if they're comparing the classified documents cases that run in parallel between Biden and Trump, the disparate treatment, obviously, between the two of them, even if there are legal nuances or fact-based differences that are material to that analysis. We're talking about what the average person is looking at the news and seeing, right? The general nature of the information being pushed around. Now we're talking about a corrupt Fulton County District Attorney. Again, whether Fannie Willis is disqualified or removed from prosecution is immaterial to what the actual story is in that case. When it comes to Jack Smith and the prosecution of Trump and his insistence to the court that this thing be taken to trial in advance of the November election, I think that many average people will be looking at this as with a healthy amount of skepticism. And I do think that the reason I brought up the polls, I do think that there is a cumulative effect in the aggregate that is to Donald Trump's benefit because of that.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I do think that Trump he's surviving and thriving because he reflects the voice of many people who feel like the system isn't working, and let's not pretend that it is. And many people take a look at the political process, and their response to it is FY, and that's not Frank Yummy. That's the Trump candidacy, and candidly, that's why I'll be voting for him if I vote at all. I don't think the system is working. I think it's ridiculous that we're pouring tens, if not hundreds of $1 millions into Ukraine while we can't secure our own border. We're housing folks who arrive here by whatever means in hotels and giving them 3 hots and a cot without putting them in jail, but at the same time letting veterans live as homeless. We never really addressed the issue of deaths of despair in 2020 because we were too busy despairing over the death of a criminal in Minneapolis. I mean, there's just a whole sense in which the world is out of whack. And I don't know what's going to put it back in whack, but I'm thankful that I'm thankful that Trump is up there. You know.
Well, and perhaps I'll leave you with this. Maybe it's, it's somewhat about, Trump's confidence in Trump or the perspective on what is going on with respect to all the litigation. But I mean, look at this. 7 in 10 voters say that Hunter Biden should serve jail time if convicted.
Well,
Right.
he won't. He won't. He
And
won't.
it's amazing, right? I mean, this poll is amazing, and I think that the answer to that basic question is somewhere within the data. I think overwhelmingly that, again, my conclusion is that in the lawfare, as I've termed it here, and as is, I didn't term it that, but I agree with the definition of lawfare, um, is to Trump's benefit. It is inuring to his wholesale benefit. Now, whether that has anything to do with the way that the elections are administered this term, what we're staring down in terms of a crisis at the southern border, rising tensions geopolitically, with the knowledge now that France is perhaps going to put NATO troops into Ukraine, the escalation going on in the Middle East. I don't know what November holds because there still seems to be miles and miles and miles between then and now.
Yeah, they sure do. Imperious, thanks for the Figgis recommendation. I have that book. I thought there was another book that you recommended, and I'd been looking for it on Amazon. Imperious is like of the view that somehow democracy is a failure, that rights are things that we create, and that when we create rights, we arbitrarily draw divisions that are unsustainable, that all power flows from God, and that we need to have a monarch, a Christian theocracy, I presume, and the divine right of kings best expresses that. There are those who believe that. They are in the vast minority. But I respect Imperious's advocacy, and I'm aware of a powerful trend of Christian nationalism in the United States right now and disaffection with democracy. I'm willing to revisit the topic of the divine right of kings, which was laid to waste in the 17th century by Locke and others. I'm just not sure I'm willing to sign on. So if that was the book, Figgis, if Figgis's book was it, Imperious, I respect you for reading it. I promise to reread it and to comment on it soon. Mike, I think we talked beyond our welcome here. I've been getting hate notes. Will you shut up, you gas bag? Well, the question is, will you stop listening, you loser?
No, I think we've had really strong attendance today. We've actually had strong attendance for the last couple of weeks, but it's always nice to have all of the usual suspects in the chat. I do think you all make each other better. You certainly make me better, and by extension, Norm. And I'm speaking specifically, it's me again, Lawyer Will, Jackson Barrett, T Girl, BTL, Thinking Man. Thank you over on Rumble, and then of course, Dawn. I loved your question just a few moments ago, asking whether the world was ever in whack, quote unquote. If we're saying that things are out of whack, the question is, was the world ever in whack, and were we previously under some illusion of order and civility? And that's
So
something we don't have time for, Norm.
No, but because you guys are always looking for something to read, I want to give you a quick report on my American history project. I told you I was reading a series of textbooks on American history, and I started with Thomas Kidd. I'm about 500 pages in, 100 pages to go. Kidd is an historian from Baylor, and it's an American history, from colonial times to the present. One of the things that is so interesting to me is just the great extent of violence resulting in death throughout American history. The number of riots ranging from draft riots to race riots to food riots. And by contrast, we live in Pacific times, that is peaceful times. We don't have the sort of violence that has characterized American politics throughout our history. But yet We spend all this time talking about partisan divisions and how horrible things are. I hate to sound like a Steven Pinker groupie, but he's written rather that things have improved, that we are less violent, that we're more capable of getting along together than ever before, and that there's room for optimism about collective life together. I don't share it. But yet, when I read a history of the United States and I see the extent of violence of people against people throughout that history, I just kind of wonder. There it is. That's the book, Democracy, the Guide Who Failed. Thank you, Imperius. I've lived long enough today to have another reading recommendation, something to do in the middle of the night. Folks, I think we got to wrap it up here. I don't know what we're going to do about the rest of the week. Mike and I haven't decided. I'm going to be in LA. I don't know if I'm going to be able. I don't know if I can keep, Dawn McNeil and who else is out there in California? And Maury, and others. I don't know if I don't know if I'm capable of getting up at 5
Junior
o'clock.
Coltrane band. Where you at, Junior?
Yeah, where's Junior Coltrane today?
Or this week? Haven't heard.
Probably in a lockup somewhere based on his comments. Junior, if you need a lawyer, give us a call. We're here for you. 1-800-DIAL-NORM. All right, folks, that's it for Law and Legitimacy. AMF, Yo-Yo, we'll be back at you soon.
AMF, Yo-Yo. And I believe we will stream tomorrow, 8 a.m., whether Norm is with us or not. Friday is the question, and we will update you accordingly on X and the other platforms that we're on. No matter what, subscribe to the newsletter. We've gotten a lot of good feedback, Norm, from this week's newsletter. People really love what you're writing about. So,
that's good.
There.
Great. All right.
Well, look, Mari's doing a set tonight. All right, we're out of here.
Mari, you got to tell us your real name. You got to tell us where it is. We'll be happy to talk about it, but I'm not going to out you without your permission. All right.
See you tomorrow, Norm. Thank you. We'll talk.
All right. Ciao.